Please welcome Laura Walker of New York Public Radio, Tina Rosenberg of Solutions Journalism Network, Monique Villa of Thomson Reuters Foundation, Michael Brunt with The Economist, Aaron Sherinian of the UN Foundation, and John Lansing, CEO and Director of BBG.
Hi, guys. Wow. So for the last couple of days, we've been talking a lot about media, but a value of the Social Good Summit has always been that whether it be audiences or people or issues, we subscribe to that value that says nothing about them without them, right? So we always want to make sure we're talking with people instead of talking about people. Well, what about the media? We know it's a huge actor in all of the issues we've talked about, these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, all of the things going on. This panel is the panel that I'd like to be stuck on a train with for a long time, because these guys are great. We're going to get the train going here, and we hope to get going some of the questions that you have and some of the reactions in social media, because media has got to solve and it's got to sell. So that's the reason that we've brought together this panel. And I'd love to, and you have the bios of these folks who are here. They're doing pioneering work on this issue, but keeping those questions in mind, I'm gonna start off with this idea. You've got to sell and you've got to solve. So Tina, you have started out something that people are now talking about, solutions journalism, right? Let's start off that way, and then I'm gonna pose a question to each of you. Get ready for it. These guys know how to talk. Tina, why solutions journalism? Is it something whose time has come, or is it something that's always been around?
It's been around to a certain extent. It may not have had a label and a name on it, but we think it's very, very important at the Solutions Journalism Network that journalists don't think of our jobs as simply covering what is wrong with the world. Because every problem that we're wrestling with, other people are wrestling with it too. And that means there's many different responses, and some of those are going to be more successful or more newsworthy than others. So let's go look at them and see what they're doing that's working and what they're doing that's not working. So we feel that that's a really important component, not only to give the whole story of what's going on, but also to engage an audience that's really tired of just seeing a distorted picture of the world, looking only at the problems.
So does the world only want good news and fluffy stuff? Is that what it comes down to?
This isn't fluff, and it's not good news. It's rigorous reporting. It's not celebrating things. It's covering them, and also talking about what's not working about them. So we consider this just plain old journalism.
So plain old journalism is something that's hard fought. It's an art and it's a science, and Monique, your organization is leading on this, and your organization has a mission to help uncover those underreported stories, and you talk to journalists all around the world. What are they telling you? What are the obstacles to getting to these stories about what solves, these underreported stories about the issues? What is it that's getting in the way from between a journalism and that story?
Yeah, you touched two things. One is the underreported stories that indeed the Thomson Reuters Foundation covers with a team of journalists. We have 40 staff around the world, plus 100 freelancers, covering what we call the underreported stories. That is, the ones that don't attract mainstream media. But more and more, what we cover becomes then taken by mainstream media. So just one example, we started 7 years ago to cover the human impact of climate change. So you take the climate change by a human angle to interest people, and then you start the conversation. We cover slavery and human trafficking. 5 years ago, nobody was speaking of it. Now it starts. Since 6 months now, we have started to cover a major issue that nobody addressed, which is access to land, access to property. When you think that in Africa, 90% of the land is not attributed, that if you are a widow in Africa, you immediately lose your land, it goes to the brother of your husband. When you think that women don't own 20% of the land in the world, it's a crucial issue. So we are starting to shed light on that, but by taking the human angle all over the world. And we can do that thanks to a big grant from Omidyar. So thank you, Omidyar Network. But it's going to change the view of many things, because it will do, I guess, like slavery. We are distributed on our website, but also on the Reuters wires. So it goes around the world immediately. And so it gives a lot of ideas to people who never thought of this issue, but say, oh, maybe we should investigate more on this. And then they do a big investigation, and it gives a new light on things. But when you speak of the barriers for people to be able to be a journalist, etc., one of the big barriers around the world where we are is that it has never been as unsafe for journalists to work around the world. In 2015, that is to say last year, 69 journalists have been killed on the job.
69 in 2016.
69. And in 2016, it seems that it is again the same trend. Okay. So it's a very, very difficult job to report accurately. And so what we do also is we do training of journalists to train them on how to report in an accurate manner, because we think that good reporting is foster democracy. Mm-hmm. And so we have created, for instance, before the elections in Myanmar, Myanmar Now, which is a news agency for the journalists in Myanmar to give them accurate, unbiased news, etc. So we did that before in Egypt immediately after the revolution. So we are multifolded, but journalism is, of course, at the core of what we do, but journalism can be a force for democracy and for good.
And you talked about the dangers, and thank you for bringing to light the reality that we're not talking about reporting on something, we're talking about human beings that are part of that story as well. Yep. And we're here in your city, Laura, and radio is a thing that many people think, really, radio? But under you, and since you've been at New York Public Radio, things have gotten big. Your readership has gotten big. So tell us how publics are reacting to this, listeners are reacting to this. What's happening?
Well, it's a fascinating time for radio, for audio, because people are walking around with headphones in their ears and on all mobile devices. And so, we are growing our audience both here in New York and also through podcasting. So we actually reach, with all of our national shows and here in New York, and the podcast, we reach 20 million people a month through the work we do. I think it is also the power and the intimacy of the human voice and a story well told. So if, I was very inspired, for example, by, Joe Biden's speech. And when we cover cancer, we will cover it by talking about the statistics that he's talking about, by talking about the need for research, by looking at immunotherapy, but we will also tell the human story. So one of our podcasts opened a discovery about cancer by the host herself talking about how she had been diagnosed with breast cancer the same day she found out she was pregnant. And she talked about in her podcast, what is she going to do and what kind of choices does she have? And through that, got into the science and got into that sense of, relief in many ways that there are choices that she had that, somebody wouldn't have had 10 years ago. She kept the baby and she's doing fine.
So is radio, if it's an intimate medium, is radio better apt to tell some of these stories, the ones that Tina's talking about? I mean,
we are collaborating with Tina on several projects. One about juvenile justice in New Jersey and looking at the sentences, how long the sentences are for juveniles who are being sentenced. We're looking at work throughout our newsroom in this coming year about the affordability of living in New York, who can afford to live in New York, and we're collaborating with Solutions Journalism. So we combine the journalism with the data, with the engagement with the audience. And I think that's the power of bringing it all together, to try to get people to not just listen, but to then also do something, to have a conversation, to go to a panel, to do things in their own neighborhoods that they might not normally do.
So, and we'll get back to this idea about the connection between technology allowing a platform to have a renaissance, and maybe audio is having a renaissance thanks to tech. All of this is fine and dandy. We know that media has a role in social progress and informing a public, but we mentioned some gracious philanthropy and some forward-leaning, courageous philanthropists, but it's got to sell, right? And so, Michael, I'm glad you're here because your brand and the brand of The Economist is a brand that people go to become informed, right?
Sure.
But what do you do in an era when media is going through this kind of crazy puberty that it's in, and we know it's going to make it through, great, but it's changing so fast. So how does The Economist position itself so that you can be smart but still sell it?
Okay, there's a great question. So there's two sides to that. One is the journalism that we create, We say we create mind-stretching journalism for the globally curious. What does that mean? There are 76 million people in the world who we define as globally curious, and those are people who are very precise. We're the Economist. Those are people who would have a level of English language they'd be comfortable reading the Economist, and they're interested in the topics that we cover. Essentially, our circulation's growing, and we have about 850,000 people paying every week to read the Economist here in the States, about just over half of our circulation globally. There's 30 million of you. You'll all be globally curious in this room. There's 30 million of you, and it's growing. It's growing because of increased globalization, the fact that our economies are impacted by what happens elsewhere in the world, the English language, penetration around the world, and rising levels of income. But underpinning that, the reason The Economist sells is also because of our mission. So The Economist was founded in 1843 to originally campaign against the Corn Laws, which was price fixing, if you can remember your history lessons. Price fixing that was causing people to not be able to afford to eat. And we've continued campaigning throughout the last 173 years, including being the first major publication to come out in favor of same-sex marriage. We promote the people's right to choose how they end their lives and what manner they choose to do that. We have been campaigning for the legalization of drugs so that people can be helped, the legalization of prostitution so that sex workers can be helped. And those big campaigning ideas are also what sells. So we are providing the context. People read The Economist because they see what's gone on in the news, and they want to understand what the implications are for them. But also, they know that it's coming from a viewpoint that is a classically liberal viewpoint.
So a paying reader and/or a paying advertiser, hopefully some of the best advertisers are paying, is it recoiling because you've got a social agenda or a campaign that's part of your reporting?
No, because there are occasions when our editorial will be potentially at conflict with some of our advertisers, but we're financially independent, and it's my job, because I have to get people to pay to read it, to make sure that we do stand financially independent without our advertising to an extent. So that's really critical to our journalists.
You could hear the eyebrows going up when you were telling the story about the Corn Laws. I don't think everyone knows that.
Oh.
I'm glad you brought that story up about the DNA and the history of the masthead. Tina, tell us a story. We have all of these great solutions. We've been able to bring to light some of them, but we'd love to hear if it is indeed a thing, if solutions journalism is out there and people are reading it and it's viable and it's impactful. Tell us where solutions journalism pushed the needle on one of these big goals we're talking about.
Okay, it is out there. We have more than 70 newsroom partners in the United States, and we're starting to move overseas. And for example, a couple of stories that have come out in the last couple of months. The Cleveland Plain Dealer did a big story on how Baltimore was lowering infant mortality rates. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune is doing a series on what works to prevent people from joining radical Islam groups, because they have a very large Somali community there. Nature just ran a piece on a drug development organization that brings new drugs to market at a tiny fraction of the cost of everybody else's. It's out there. People are doing it. When we started this Solutions Journalism Network, we had a newsletter where we would send out 3 stories a week to subscribers. We had trouble finding 3 stories a week. Now we could send you 3 stories a week on any topic. It is definitely a growing thing, and readers clamor for it. I mean, this is something the audience desperately wants. And there's research about that.
And I can see, because people are starting to tweet out the Nature article and a couple of just as you call out the articles that are part of the network or that are part of this, they're realizing that's the kind of thing that they want to read. So I hope that we will dive into the stories, and I hope that they'll provoke some stuff. I'd like to provoke some stuff, speaking of which. I'm going to go off script for a minute, if you don't mind. But we have international and American-based media experts here with us today. So I'd like to ask those if they have anything to say about media, what sells, what solves when it comes to this election. Monique, can I put you on the hot seat? Apologies, but what sells, what solves? Are we solving anything?
Well,
or are we just selling? What's going on?
You know, I live in London, but I come more or less every 2 months for 2 weeks in the US, different cities. And I've been absolutely taken aback and fascinated by the way the networks, the television networks, have created a president or at least a presidential candidate, in a way which is unprecedented by giving him a permanent tribune, permanent. Every morning. I was here, last week I was in San Francisco. The big suspense was Trump will tell us where Obama is born. I mean, I could not believe my ears. And it was for 2 days on the networks. I mean, how can you have so much advertising for free? I mean, we should ask you. but it has been extraordinary. And it, of course, it puts a very big question, which is the role of media in politics, in democracy, etc. You know, after Brexit in London, there was this fantastic article in the FT, the Financial Times, on the post. We are now in the era of the post-truth.
Yeah.
Truth has no importance whatsoever from now. And we saw that during Brexit because the numbers that were given were crazy. I mean,
so how do you get that back? How do you get back to truth matters? We know this.
Yeah,
trust matters.
Trust is absolutely essential. I mean, it's the whole business of media relies on trust. From the moment you start to go to the post-truth era, where will it finish? It's very worrying. It's worrying in the US. It's worrying in Europe. We saw it with Brexit. We will see probably a few things during the French campaign, next year. This is one of the biggest worry today, I think, for journalism. What is our role, and can we play that game like this?
You're living this up front and center here, Laura.
Every day.
Tell
I mean,
us.
it's a very tough election to cover, and I think the media has so often just been kind of repeating what the candidates are saying, and being manipulated in many ways. I think it is up to us, really. You have a situation now with a lot of technology where people are in more and more in their own echo chambers, whether it's their social media echo chamber, the cable TV echo chamber, where on some of these, racist and horrible statements are getting applause and worse. And we have in the media, we have a responsibility, I think, to cover the issues. We're doing a few things. We're doing 30 issues in 30 weeks on Brian Lehre's show. We are also we're about to do a series next, I think it's starting next week, called United States of Anxiety. And it's looking at what is underneath this, what is underneath some of these issues. Because you have to, at the same time, you have to hold the politicians accountable, but you also have to listen to what the people are saying and what they're experiencing and why they may be voting one way or another. And so this is a podcast. It's a new kind of form. It's both a report on the air, it's a report nationally and locally, and it'll be a podcast. And we'll be actually working a lot in Long Island and in other places around our area.
Michael, you said that half of your readers are from
the States.
This place,
yes.
right? And so while we're talking about global issues, we can't pretend like this is not happening. So let's hug the elephant in the room.
Yep.
And tell us, how are you viewing it as someone who's managing a media brand?
Extraordinary seismic events that happen in the world sell. I mean, Brexit was a good example. We got double the number of subscribers immediately after Brexit because people
Same for the
what
FT.
on earth is going to happen as a result of this. And there's no doubt there's one way the election could swing that would definitely boost subscriptions to The Economist more than the other, because people will want to know, right, if that's the result, what will be the implications? What will that mean to me? People in the States, when I talk to subscribers, what made you read The Economist? They say, I want to understand the world beyond my own borders, but I want to understand what the implications are for my country and for my world. So we have a role there, but I think to Laura's point with the echo chambers, we can be rigorous and factual and present good quality journalism, and this room of people here will read that, but it will be an echo chamber, and how we get that out beyond this particular sort of echo chamber is a very big challenge.
So those who say media is going through a transition and has lost its way, or these stories don't exist, I mean, Tina's already whet my appetite for some stories. I'm part of the US of Anxiety. Wow, some days I feel like I'm Commander-in-Chief of the US of Anxiety, I don't know. But this idea about all of these stories that exist, the trainings that you're part of, Michael, what The Economist is doing, this tells me that it's a myth that there's not great journalism out there. And none of you has cited social media as angst. So what I'd love to do in tweet-like format, because our time is up, what is the connection? This is really putting you on the spot. What is the connection between the age of social and media? And we'll end there. So we're gonna put you on the spot, okay? So how do you view it? What is it that the role of social media and media can be?
I think it challenges us to create dialogue and not diatribe.
Good. Will we take it? Yes. Let's take it. Dialogue, not diatribe. That's tweetable. Very nice. Okay, Monique, what is it?
For us, it's fantastic because it's so many new sources, immediate sources we never had before at Reuters or at the Thomson Reuters Foundation. But it is also anxiety, lack of checking the reality and the truth, to come back to the truth and the trust, which is fundamental. So it's a fantastic arm. In Egypt, it gave people who had no voice before a voice, and they could express what it was. And I'm thinking especially of the women in Egypt, who suddenly could speak, etc. So it's very positive, and of course very dangerous because immediate, not checked, etc.
So it's explosive, but it's a voice.
Yeah.
Right? Will we take it? Okay, we're going to take it. Michael, we're putting on trial, apparently.
Okay.
This is the Coliseum in here right now.
Yeah,
Michael, up to you.
Ruthless Coliseum. I would say the role of social media has transformed The Economist. We have 20 million social media followers. We would never have reached so many people if it wasn't for social media, and it has transformed our business and has been and therefore a movement of good.
Okay, so it's not busting your bottom line, it's making it. Are we
It's
there?
business.
Okay, Tina, take us home.
I'm going to be the curmudgeon.
Go.
I think it contributes to the bubble that Laura was talking about.
Okay.
People now get news mainly from their friends, and
Yeah.
we all know that we choose friends who think like us. So, you know, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but now everyone has their own facts as well, and social media, I think, has really contributed to that.
Yeah, both true.
So can we burst our own bubbles a little bit and look outside of those bubbles for the facts? Can we take it? Okay. I want to thank these guys because you're remaking media and we need it so that it can sell and solve. Thank you to our guests.
Thank you.